Welcome to the Desert Sanctuary with Carl and Laura Forehand.
Often when we have doubts about religion or simply want to ask questions, it can feel like we are wandering out into the desert.
We would like to invite you to join our sanctuary, the Desert Sanctuary.
We've tried to pick guests that would resonate with and challenge us and our fellow seekers here in the desert.
We believe that a key to the journey is to keep asking good questions, and we believe that all stories are sacred.
Our hope is that you will find life and healing for your body and mind, and that you will be able to be where you are and be who you are.
And now, here is our show. Hi, welcome to the Desert Sanctuary podcast. I'm Laura Forehand. I am here with Carl Forehand, and we are going to jump into today's podcast. We have Karen Mathson here with us. Something that, just has been really speaking to me is to have pastors' wives, either present or past pastors' wives, on to kind of talk about their own personal stories inside of organized religion. And so I reached out to Sherry Bothwell, and she had put me in touch with about 4 ladies, and we already talked with Angie, and today we're going to talk with Karen and hear about her story. And Karen, we're just so grateful that you're taking some time to be with us today on the Desert Sanctuary. Thank you so much for being vulnerable, because I know that's hard, but I thank you for being vulnerable and telling your story.
And thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think what a great idea to talk to pastor's wife, but what a tough endeavor.
It is, yeah.
Because I remember you, Laura, saying you didn't want to, during our ministry, you didn't want to do anything that would hurt the ministry.
I didn't want to be the one to take the ministry down.
Yeah, so you couldn't speak up.
Right.
Even though I didn't feel like I was trying to squash you. But
no,
it was kind of the situation.
It's the underlying message that you get, yes. Yeah. Or that we got, I should say, or that I got.
And then it seems like, to me, that's just my opinion, that
right.
Once people are outside of that and they can look at it and see it differently, it's kind of like, well, I was in the spotlight in the fishbowl for so long, I don't really want to be there anymore. Yet when people like Karen speak up, I think it's exciting that to kind of start hearing our heart about trying to help other women,
right,
that have go through similar things, even if they're not a pastor's wife, but
that's
they're
true.
in ministry.
In ministry of some type, yeah.
So I'm excited about this, and I know there's lots to say. And so we're going to start with Karen telling her story. And Karen, we believe stories are sacred. We don't take it lightly that you would trust us enough to share your story with us. It's deeply, we're oftentimes moved by stories, and we learn something almost every time we listen to a story.
Absolutely.
So we thank you for the privilege, but in whatever detail and whatever way you want to, can you just tell us your backstory? What is it?
I became a Christian in December 76 and felt like I could go to the college that was related to the church I had gone to. And I met my ex-husband there, and I thought, this is great. I'm going to be able to have a Christian husband. We're going to live happily ever after. That couldn't have been farther from the truth. So we got married, and after a couple of years, we finally found a church. Well, he was brought in as a deacon, and he knew that pastor. That pastor had been an orthodontist before he became a pastor, and he had retired and got his licensure. And he had done landscaping at his house for a couple of summers when he was home from college. Well, I didn't know that. So he kind of knew Cliff. And he was brought in as a deacon almost right away. And I was due with our first baby. And I said, I don't want to work in nursery. I want to wait at least 3 months so I can at least learn what it is to have a baby, they put me in right away.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
They put me in right away. And that lasted for 7 years.
Wow.
With very few breaks.
Yep.
And the last 3 years I was nursery charge. But it's like, I couldn't get a break. I said, I don't want to do this. I don't want to, I want a break. And the pastor would say no.
Mm.
The nursery person would ask the pastor, he'd say no. I mean, I don't get that. You're forcing people to work. So anyway, I had the baby and he began to change. I mean, you got to get up in the middle of the night and the baby would cry and I'd bring her to bed. I nursed her and I'd have to turn the light on and he'd say, I need my sleep. And so I learned to tiptoe and walk on eggshells around him. And that night I thought, what did I marry? What have I gotten myself into? And I stayed in the baby's room for a while thinking about that. And we continued and we ended up moving closer to the pastor. And when we would have a disagreement, he would leave and go talk to the pastor and come home with a note with his decision, because I realized now, but not then, that I was to listen to him, let him be the head and have the last say on everything. And I'm not that kind of a person. You don't regard me with respect, then I'm not going to agree. If I tell you no, I mean no. And he was telling lies to the pastor behind my back. And I didn't know that. And a year after he had been brought in, they had 4 deacons that were brought in. And they brought in the deacons' wives as deaconesses, except me. I said, why can't I be in? I'm no different than anybody else. He said, you're not ready yet. And that was the only answer I got. I got no explanation. So, what was it? How'd that go? Oh, we went to a retreat and that the pastor had for the deaconess and deacons. And that night when the meeting started, the pastor started off, Karen, you need to apologize to your husband. And I was just, I was awestruck. I'm going, well, what did I do? And I said, I'm sorry for whatever it is I did. And the pastor said, that's not a true apology. You need to go back and apologize to your husband. But we have things we need to talk about and get done at the meeting, and you take care of that later. So after the meeting that night, a deaconess came up to me and she said, I saw him talking to the pastor before the meeting started, and he was crying on his shoulder saying, I don't know what to do with Karen. I'm thinking, oh, we got something going on here. Couldn't quite, figure it out. So next thing I know, a few months later, like 3 or 4 months later, he comes by, the pastor comes by and talks to me about marriage. And my husband's sitting next to me on the floor, and I'm just saying, okay, I know what the Bible says about marriage. And he left. And about a month later, he came back with one of the people that helped start the church, and 2 of them came. And I'm going, something isn't right here. And the Lord told me they're trying to use Matthew 18:15-17. And I'm going, how can he throw me out of the church? We're married. I have a child. And we have a covenant between us. And I kind of realized that he had brought the pastor into our marriage. as a triangulation, and I couldn't get away from that. I didn't know what to do. I could see things going on. I couldn't get answers for myself, and I really wasn't asking anybody, but I was sure searching. And there wasn't a lot of information out there.
So no matter what the situation was, you were always outnumbered.
Right.
Right.
I was recalcitrant. That's what he told me. I was wrong. The pastor told me that. So we're in church, we da-dee-da-dee-da. In 84, the Lord did some things in my life. It was something I could always rely on and go back on. And then not long after that, just a few months later, I became depressed. We had moved out of town into a HUD home, and he made sure I didn't have a car. We only had one car. So if I had WIC appointments or doctor's appointments or anything with the kids, the two girls, we had two girls by then, and I had to get up and take him to work. And he worked at 6:30 to 3. So I had to get the kids up, take him to work, go back home, do my whatever I did, go pick him up and bring him back home. Mm-hmm. No other car. And I'm going, I really like a car. Nothing. So finally in 1987, I'd had a boy in September of 98 or 86. And I had to have surgery right afterwards. I had gallstones, so I had to have surgery. And I was kind of depressed.
Sure.
After that, and I'd already gone into the depression in 84. A little bit better, but just having a hard time doing things. And
can I ask you a question about your depression? Did the church and your husband accept that?
No.
How did they handle
it? It was my problem. I had to deal with it. And I really believe that the minute that pastor sided with my husband, it was the beginning of the downfall of that church, because you can't have that kind of evil in leadership. And I was shunned by leadership as well.
So it was labeled as evil? Is that what I heard you say?
They never really talked to me about that. I mean, if we went in to talk to the pastor, it was always about me. My husband sitting next to me, and he was never addressed because he had already gone previously to talk to the pastor. So everything was about me, and I couldn't understand why.
Yeah.
So it was, the baby was 6 months old. So that would have made it about February, March, maybe April, somewhere in there. And pastor was getting kind of off and doing a lot of things at church, and it was a Sunday, and he'd have testimony time, and he'd wait until everybody came up to give a testimony. And there weren't that many people at church that evening, but it took about 3 hours that night. I mean, he waited till everybody did, and that was wrong. But I'm so depressed still. I'm confused because of all the narcissistic abuse, that gaslighting and all that they do. And I didn't know what it was. And I'm sitting on the floor nursing my baby. And he said, there's only 2 of us left. And I thought, okay, I don't have anything to say. I can't even figure out my life. So I just said, I don't have anything to say right now. And he sat there quiet. I could kind of tell he was pretty angry that I wouldn't give a testimony and come up. Well, I didn't need to if I didn't feel like I had anything to share. So he gets up.
And maybe if people would just like stop and look at you sitting on the floor nursing a baby, they would see your testimony right there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, I know that's not the testimony that they want you to say when you stand up there, because they want you to get up there and, have some flowery something that all is well with your life and, God has taken care of all of your needs and whatever. But I'm like, your testimony was right there sitting on the floor nursing
Right.
a baby.
Yeah.
Right.
That's that. I'm going to try really hard not to get angry, Karen, but I get very angry
Oh.
sometimes.
So, before church had come in, there was a new lady who came to church that night, and I talked to her, and I told her, I'm kind of down trying to figure things out, just this, that, and the next thing, and really nice lady. So, when the pastor had gotten up to give his testimony, and he began to close the service, the lady stood up and said, "I think we need to pray for Karen."
Mm.
Speaking on my behalf. Well, he said, in front of the church, he said, she has a willful spirit she needs to take care of.
Yeah.
And I can see, anger. Yeah. What could I do? I couldn't get out of it. And I said,
Right.
on the way home, I said, it's time to leave, Cliff. It's time to leave. And he agreed, because there were some other things going on in church. We're charismatic, so the same people were coming up for prayer every service with the same issues every service. And there was a lady that came, and she believed in going into this trance. So when we'd have worship, she'd walk all around the church with her hands up, her eyes closed. And even when he was teaching a sermon, and just weird things were starting to happen in the church.
Mm-hmm.
So Ed, the guy, that's who came to talk to us too. We talked to him aside from the pastor, and he said, "I've got to go on an evangelistic trip for 2 weeks. Can you wait that long?" So in the meantime, Cliff wrote up a list of things that were happening. That was in June, and all leadership left by August, within 6 weeks, and the church closed its doors in December.
Wow.
Mm.
So then we were looking for another church, and we finally found one, and they were offering some leadership classes, and I asked if to be added to this list, and my husband's there, and the pastor says no. And unbeknownst to me, again, my ex had talked to the pastor about me, and without my knowing, can't figure out, why can I not be in ministry? Why? And I sing and I play piano. I couldn't do anything, even in the church we were in before. Nothing. Nope, can't do it. You're not good enough. Blah, 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 blah. So I told the pastor, well, why can't I take the class now and then have it for later when, I decide to go into ministry? Oh, great. Okay. He couldn't argue with that. He didn't know what to do with that. But we didn't stay at that church very long. There were some things that were going on. He's a pastor that was a bit controlling, and at worship, every song we sang, he had to go like this, up another key. He would have it up 2, maybe 3 times for one song. Same thing with the next song and the next song. And I'm going, what is wrong with him? You don't do that. So I just left it.
What they're trying to do is alter the mood.
Yeah.
If
Right.
it can alter your mood, it's almost like a trance, like you mentioned. It's similar to hypnosis. And then once you're there, once you're feeling it, then whatever they want to suggest gets through easier. But anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry for interrupting.
It's okay. So we ended up leaving and went to another church, and we didn't really get that involved. And my ex came up with the idea, let's go to Bible school. Because I'd asked him after we left the church we'd been in for 7 years, I wanted a divorce. And he just looked at me, wouldn't talk about anything. I mean, I didn't know why. I didn't have a solid answer as to why, but I knew I needed to get out. So this was his love bombing, going to Bible school. And he said, you can go to school too. So he allowed me to go to school. So we went to Christ for the Nations in Dallas, Texas. And I was very thankful because while I was there, the Lord brought back memories of sexual abuse in my life that I did not know. I had repressed them all.
Mm-hmm.
So I was able to get help and referred out to professional counselors. And thankfully, all the counselors I have had over the years have been Christian.
Mm.
And I believe God has directed that. And we graduated, and then we moved off campus, and he began to do his certification for the first workers permit for the denomination we were in. And I noticed he was coming down on the kids a little harder. And I didn't like that. And when I had remembered the abuse, the sexual abuse, God taught me how to talk to my kids. I never touched them again, never had to discipline them again. I learned to talk to my children.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was like night and day, and I'm going, wow. And even the kids noticed. But he became harder on the kids. I had gotten a job while he worked early, 6 to 3, 6:33 to 3 job. And he'd get home before I did. And we had taken some marriage classes in school. And we were taught that, if you're going to discipline a child, take them aside and, tell them why and tell them you love them and spank them. But his spanking left bruises.
Mm.
And I'm going, this has got to change. But I just observed. And then he got his license for pastoral. And he laid into the kids really hard. And one night we were getting ready for church Sunday night, and I have an ADD kid. And they have to go back and finish what they're doing,
Yeah.
And you just have to learn how to redirect him. Well, he didn't have that in him. And he asked him to go get his shoes on, which were in his bedroom. And here he was coming out, and I'm going, uh-oh, he thinks he's got to finish his project. And that's exactly what he said. And his dad turned around and backhanded him on his arm. I had to take him to church with ice packs on his arm.
Wow.
He had 3 bruises from that whack.
Mm.
And one of the kids, he would take his hand around her neck and squeeze so hard it left 5 finger bruises. She'd have to wear scarves around her neck to go to school. Most of the time it was on the rear end. But this, I'm going, he's out of control, and I didn't know what to do. I went to the pastor, and he said, oh, you can stay with your husband even though he's, abusing the children. And my gut's telling me, run.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I had to look at leaving. I separated, and we stayed separated for about 9 months. And I had more peace, and I should have gone home and come back to Oregon, but we were in Texas. But there were issues with my mother, and she had spoken not so nice to my kids. And I wasn't ready to face her on those issues.
Mm-hmm.
So I just dealt with what I could, and we got back together, which was a big mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Because he got a house, and he said, I'm not going to continue my pastoral license because you're so needy.
Mm.
And I'm thinking, oh, maybe I am, the whole thinking process that goes with somebody who's a narcissist. And
they really cause you to question yourself.
Really, all the time, everything.
You really lose a sense of who you are. and you just
Yes.
really don't know who you are anymore.
And I didn't.
Yeah.
But God, after school, God was speaking to me pretty good. And one day he pulled me aside and he said, "Is he loving you like I love the church?" And I said, "No."
Mm.
And I realized I don't have any obligation to listen to him or do what he says, because he's not listening to God or obeying God. He's treating me like crap and my kids like crap.
Mm-hmm.
And he backed off with hitting the kids once he dropped that license, but he just he continued treating them like crap and me like crap, and I just ignored him, and he didn't like that. Oh, he didn't like that at all. But that's how it was. And I would need, let's say I know I needed a crown and I wasn't working, and he said, "Oh, go get a job." He wouldn't take care of me at all. Car breakdown. It broke down one day on the other side of town, and he said, "Oh, that's why you have AAA." I waited 45 minutes, had to drive home on a broken axle because I waited an hour for them to come and they didn't come, and he wouldn't come get me. I mean, nothing. I mean, he was totally going, "Stop, I'm not doing anything for you." I even asked him one day for $250 so I could go around and put applications in. And he said, "Go get a job." He couldn't even give me $250. I'm going, something's wrong here.
Can we talk about that? Can we talk about that just a little bit?
Yes.
You've said several times he became. What do you attribute that to? Why did he become that? You know what I mean? It's
yes.
easy to be, we could be real spiritual about it, but there's some real practical reasons. Like I'm a former pastor. I've been insensitive to my wife, and ministry, and during ministry, there's some things I didn't notice, some things I didn't pay attention to, so on. I'm not trying to make any excuses for anybody, but what made him become like that?
I couldn't figure out what was going on. I didn't know what he was doing. And it wasn't until 2018 when I had surgery and I had to have a wound back on. God says, research narcissism. And that was late in 2018. So I've been healing since then, but I began to see that all of my mental list became checked off, and that what he was doing was devaluing me and discarding me, because he wouldn't accept anything, wouldn't do anything. And it was really hard. I mean, he just didn't have a right mind in how to think, he has no empathy, let's put it that way. He doesn't know how to deal with things. And I think being in pastorate, you've got to have empathy for people. You've got to know where to meet them. And he told me before we went into pastoring, he says, well, here in whatever, 1st or 2nd Corinthians 13, he said, well, if they aren't doing this in verse 3, then I'm not going to pass or counsel them. And I'm thinking he needs to take some counseling classes, because you can't tell people that. You're going to, push them away. And he said, well, that's how I'm going to do it. He wouldn't talk about it at all. And before I left, he was saving money so that we could move back home, and he was going to start a church. And I didn't want to start a church with him because I knew it was going to end up like the first church we were in. People were going to be so hurt, and I couldn't take that. And I had my children to think of too.
So do you think
he's just selfish. He's very selfish. Everything had to be for him.
So do you think that what I'm hearing you say is that got worse in
Yes.
ministry.
Yeah,
He may,
after we got out.
he
Yeah.
may have had those tendencies, and
Yeah.
we all think when we get married that we'll change the other person, but then it became worse because he was in ministry. My understanding is that narcissistic personality disorder is very hard to overcome, but the church doesn't always, but it tends to foster that.
Yes.
It's the place where, being a narcissist is productive as far as the organization goes. It helps build churches because, you're that way, and you have to have kind of a strong ego and things like that. But anyway, this is your story. I don't want to.
And well, it is, because my thing is what I finally learned is that there's a teaching that you need to do more for your husband, and you should not get divorced. A marriage can be saved, and you need to stick in there. They say, let's do marriage, couples counseling. No, you should never, ever do couples counseling. You need individual until the other person changes. And he would never go to counseling. When I make an appointment, he would be gone. I don't remember him leaving the house. He left.
Yeah.
And even though I was seeing a counselor and had seen somebody new, I didn't get enough information as to know what to do and how to do it, because I was done with being treated so bad.
And do you want to ask?
Well, my question is, where was the church in all this? Because I know for me, they fell very silent a lot when there were things that one of us, well, typically me, was accused of, or if there was if Carl was the pastor and they wanted something done with we're talking very surface level stuff, and if he was like, no, I don't think that's the way we need to go right now, not saying we can't do that in the future, but right now, I would be ignored by the church. I would also say, however, that if I were in a similar situation to you, that I think the higher ups in the organization would 100% have Carl's back, and it would be something. I would get the message, I would receive that message loud and clear that I was being negligent in something. I wasn't enough, or, I wasn't.
It has to be your fault.
It's my fault, So like, I'm just like, I get that all this is going on, but if he's like a minister, a pastor, whatever, like, where was the rest of the church in all of this? I understand that the pastor that he was talking to was obviously on his side, and I can see the higher ups in a particular denomination doing the same thing. But I'm like, where was the rest of the church when it came to all this stuff that you are dealing with?
Well, with the first church, he never listened to me. It was trying to get me to change to be, let me close the door. The pastor had already made his mind up. He had sided with Cliff, and I had no way out. If I couldn't even talk to anybody, I couldn't even talk to leadership. I didn't know who to talk to.
Right.
And I didn't even know how to talk, because I had issues from my childhood too, and I had a narcissistic mom. So I feel like learning how to deal with her, I just learned to deal with it better when I got married.
So it's like, you talked about how you had to walk on eggshells with your husband, your ex-husband, but it's like, you learned that very young. If you have narcissism in your family of origin, you learn very young how to play the game and how to get small, right? So, yeah, and walk on those eggshells.
And I can tell you a quick incident. When I was 5, I went to talk to my mom. I had a question, and she's a teacher. second grade teacher, and she should know how to talk with kids, right? Yeah, well, I go talk to her and I asked her something. She says, what in the hell are you thinking of? And it was all these expletives after that. By that time, I had turned around to go to my room and I said, I'm leaving. I'm done. And I had packed my bag. She's over me taking all the toys out. I didn't care. I just wanted out of my house. I wanted a different mother. And I only got a block and a half because my dad was coming home from work. And I was a daddy's girl then. So, and I'm the oldest, and I didn't have a brother until I was 6. So, yeah, I learned to adapt to it by just not saying anything. And I went to my room, tried to avoid her at all costs. And it was the whole childhood. And by the time I was 11, I could see that she had the problem. It wasn't me. So it was a different angle when we got married, but it's the same stuff, trying to give myself purpose, but they keep pulling you down and down and down, you know?
Did you get good at reading the room?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Very good. I had to do that with my mother. So, yeah, I learned to read everybody very well, even at church. So back to the question, where was the church? Well, I told you what happened with the one church we were in after we graduated Bible school. You can stay together. And I'm going, no, you can't, you know. And I was still in counseling, but I didn't think to bring those types of things up in counseling because I was still dealing with the abuse.
Other things, yeah.
And then I separated and we got back together and it became a whole nother story. And we were in a really good church, and it was a very big church in Dallas, very nice church. But I didn't think to ask anybody or go to someone to talk about those things. I think in part because I was silenced not to say anything. And if I did, it really came down hard on me. Really came down hard.
You know, this thought just came to me, and I think because I can kind of resonate with some of the things that you're saying, but I think that when we come from a narcissistic childhood into kind of like we're kind of ushered into this narcissistic environment, community that is sometimes organized religion, like what we call trauma, now that we have been able to step out of that and evaluate, it was once kind of our normal, right? I mean, that trauma becomes normal. So it's, to me, like a lot of times people are like, well, why didn't you just leave? Or how could you put up with that? Or because it becomes your normal. You don't really see, I mean, even though God or your intuition is maybe telling you something different, a lot of times you are, and I'll use your words, you're silenced into, you know, saying, well, that's not really true. That's not really what's happening here. And so that trauma continues because it's always what you've known.
Right.
And a lot of times in religion, we can bypass a lot of that stuff. We even have a song called "It Is Well with My Soul," you know, and I'm nothing. I mean, that song is very moving, and I've talked about it and taught about it and so on. But sometimes we just bypass those things and say, well, maybe it's, you know,
well, Jesus suffered, we just need to put up with it, and we just need to suffer because Jesus paid the ultimate price. I mean, those things are kind of used against you, and and therefore you aren't given permission to deal with,
to feel,
to deal with, to feel, you know, to call it what it is, narcissistic behavior. So
I just want to say also that I sense in you that, you know, real early on, you had the inclination to have a voice, and so much of what we've done is silenced women's voices, and it's coming to a head right now where we said we need to hear from them. You know, look what situation we're in right now, that we're off, political parties fight with each other, religious groups fight with each other, we're fighting within our churches and so on. And a lot of it's because we haven't heard half of the voices, or over half of the voices.
Probably over half, because you're talking not just women, but you're also talking minority voices as well, which women are part of that, but they're not the only part of that.
Yeah.
So
but I just wanted to say, that's one of the tragedies of your story, is that you didn't get to use your voice. And I think you would have had a lot to say.
As a child, and not even in the marriage. And it was obvious when we started at that church, I had gifts to use, God's given gifts. And I couldn't do that. It's me.
Yeah.
Because he had to be the one to get all the pats on the back. Great job preaching. Great job playing your saxophone. And I felt like I was just there.
Yeah.
And nothing. And working in the nursery, that was out of sight, out of mind.
That's
he didn't have to deal with me during service. Because I would say to him, when there was something that came up one time, and I said, "Cliff, this isn't right. This, and this." He said, "Don't you say one word." I'm going, okay, are we in a church, or what are we doing here?
Exactly. So what advice would you have on how to get better? Like, what have you done to, and I struggle, Carl knows I struggle with this word. I struggle with the word heal, because it insinuates that we are somehow broken. And I don't like that. But for lack of a better word, how did you begin the healing process, and what can you share with, our listeners that may be feeling these same things, or even going through some of these same things?
Well, let me add one thing before I get to that point. I remember when we got back together, I tried to get back to school and try to get myself a degree, because I knew I needed something to fall back upon, and he sabotaged every effort at my going to school. And even going to, once I divorced, I came back home to take care of my mother. That was my out in the marriage, because she had colon cancer, and I knew it was time to go and take care of her, because I used to be a nurse's aide. And I thought, I'm out. I'll be able to, put myself back together. And I struggled. I was still in this confusion, this fog for years. And one church I had been invited to in Pendleton, where Mom was. And when she passed away, I finally had the time to go to church. And it was a bit cultic, and I got kicked out. Because she had certain things you needed to do to live up to her standards.
Usually try to keep you in a cult.
unless you're onto them, which is probably what it was.
Yeah.
You're probably
so the next church I went to was when I moved over here to La Grande to finish school, because Mom asked me to finish school. And that church, they wouldn't let me do anything. It would, I'd asked to be on worship team. No, we were fine. And then I wanted to do a Bible study. Well, you need to take another deliverance ministry, and this, and this. And I'm going, I don't need to do that. I'm sorry, I don't. I said, bye. So I was in another church for a couple of years, and then I went to talk to the pastor. He said, you need healing. I noticed when I went there, they wouldn't let me be in worship service. They wouldn't let me do anything. They wanted me to sit and listen. And I'm going, he didn't even say anything to me early when I was there. And they never offered me anything to heal. And that was really frustrating. I left, went to another church, didn't last there long either. And then the last church I was in, I got on the worship team, but there were some things that were happening that, to me,
Mm.
And I'm going, I don't need to put up with this. And I said, I'm leaving. You know, I left. I just abruptly left because I didn't like how I was being treated. So the thing I would say to somebody is, how are you going to find help? Where are you going to find help? You have to be persistent in finding somebody who will understand you, understand where you've been, can help you walk through all of that.
Mm.
And sometimes that's really hard.
Mm-hmm.
That's one reason I'm going into pastoral counseling. One, we've been in pastoring, but there are a lot of women out there who are hurting and have not been seen or heard. The
Mm-hmm.
church doesn't lift them up usually, like maybe not at all, because the adage that we need to do more for our husband because maybe they have a pornography problem, we just need to do more, or something else. We need to do more. No, we don't. They have to go to Jesus Christ like everyone else has to. They have a problem, and doing more for them and giving ourselves up, it's going to put us in another position of being hurt.
Yeah, and it makes us almost an enabler, like whether we wanted to do that or not,
Yes.
right? Because it's like, well, it's all up to me, so somehow I have to, like you said, walk on eggshells to help lift my husband up. And a lot of times you wind up, you know, almost giving him a pass or
Yes.
for his behavior. Yeah.
And being raised in a church with that, I've talked to my daughter who's seen it all now.
Mm-hmm.
And she said she used to see his mom just give everything to her grandfather,
Mm-hmm.
the privilege, the entitlement.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how he was raised in home. He was given that privilege and that entitlement because he was a boy and he deserved that. And that's how it is when you get into marriage. No, it's not. I didn't do that because you got to earn some keep. Mm-hmm. Show me that you're worth who you say you are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think the one thing I saw about that belief is that I cannot be Jesus Christ to my husband. I can't be Jesus Christ to him. He has to go to him for himself.
Yeah, you have to be you.
I'm not the mediator.
Yeah,
right.
You have to be you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
They say that the average age when people, I don't know how old you are, they say the average age when people finally come out about their abuse is 51. And my question is, why do you think that is? I have some suspicions, but I don't know if I know the exact answer to that.
Well, I just turned 67 yesterday. So I was 60 when I began to really see things.
Mm-hmm.
But we were divorced in 2005, and I spent 14 years wondering what took place in the marriage, what took place.
Mm-hmm.
And it just takes a long time. And there's more information out there now. There's more help that can be offered, but it's not really prevalent yet. If you can find somebody who's teaching something that's saying, oh, this hits what I've experienced, then you can say, okay, I'll watch them on YouTube. I'll watch their Facebook page, see what they have to say. And that's how I kind of got more information and began to find things out.
Mm-hmm.
And your churches weren't even acknowledging that. They weren't acknowledging
no
depression even,
right,
or anything like that, right?
No, they didn't acknowledge anything. And the one church I did go to after I had separated, it was a really good church. I mean, it was really good. But as far as trying to meet my needs in the marriage and what I was going through, there really wasn't anything offered there. I think they would have had it if maybe I said more, because it was a good church. I just didn't know how to express myself because it was that confusion, you know.
Absolutely.
That's right.
You're going, what does this have to do with that? You're always trying to figure out why you're not making the mark. why you're not living up to their expectations. What's wrong here?
Yeah.
I just want to say, like, I want people to understand that part of it. And we talked a little bit about this before we hit record, but Carl and I had been visiting with a really good friend about a week ago, and she was telling us something. She's been through quite a bit of trauma, and she was telling us, you know, a new layer in her story, and she was having a hard time kind of articulating it. And where it sounds like, you know, that you're censoring yourself, that's not really it. What it is you're trying, I mean, your brain all this time that you've been living in trauma has been trying to make sense, put pieces together. And it's really, really hard to do that when you have been in trauma. And even after you are outside of that trauma, your brain still has to heal from that trauma. Your nervous system still has to heal from that trauma. So a lot of times you don't know, like, what makes sense. Or even for me, you know, I would be thinking these things that were healing, but there was another part of me that was like, you just need to get over it. Like, you're ridiculous for even thinking that. So I want people to understand that, because I think that is something that we just think, oh, if we get outside of organized religion, or we get outside of a narcissistic marriage, that everything is going to be hunky-dory and we'll be able to form complete sentences and know who we are. And I'm like, it may take the rest of my life in order for me to do that. But here's the good news for me, is that I'm okay with that, because that means that I am finally, maybe for the first time ever, understanding who I am in a very authentic way.
I guess for my trying to get help, you talk about what's inside of you, and it's kind of like it's all these emotions, yet you're trying to make sense of it, and
Absolutely.
you're wanting a backboard from somebody.
That's right.
And they don't know how to talk about trauma.
That's right. That's right.
They don't know maybe about the ins and outs of domestic abuse, about sexual abuse. Spiritual abuse is another story, but when you've had also verbal, emotional, and psychological abuse, you don't know how to put things together. You don't know how to say things. And when you try and talk to people and really try to pour your heart out, it's like, well, oh, you just need to get over it. Oh, you need to, stand on this scripture. You're too personal. You're this, you're that.
Right.
And
which really, honestly, can I just say, just like totally adds to your trauma, because you've already been told how you're not measuring up and you're not good enough. Right. And then when you go look for help in trusted people,
you're just being silly.
And it's re-traumatizing.
It is re-traumatizing. Yep. I want people to understand that, because I mean, this goes way back, and I didn't know anything about trauma at the time, but my younger sister had a miscarriage. Let's see, gosh, how old was her youngest? I'm just going to say 30 years ago. And people kept telling her, well, at least you can get pregnant. At least you can have babies. And when she told me that she had a miscarriage, I just sat there. I sat with her in it. Like, that's what I want people to understand. Yes. You are only re-traumatizing people, and you're not going to help them in their trauma if you are telling them you just need to get over it. That was then, this is now, because you've not been able to process it. Mm-hmm. And so how can it be that was then, this is now, when I've not been able to process anything because no one will let me process it?
Yeah. I think that's one thing a lot of people don't understand. You have to walk back through your trauma.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You have to walk back through it in order to not only make sense, but to get the healing you need.
That's right.
Yeah. And it's hard as hell.
It is hard.
Yeah, it's very hard.
It's scary. I mean, yes. I made an appointment for 2 weeks to go talk to a therapist about something that my body is feeling some trauma about. And it's like, I'm scared to death to go and have to talk to somebody and possibly relive that. But I know that if I don't, and I just stuff it, give me another 6 months to a year and I'll be dealing with the same anxiety, if not worse. So you're right, Karen. You've got to do the work in order to bring that healing to yourself. And
I think in the church, sorry.
No, you're fine.
I see that when you're telling somebody that, if the leaders can be sensitive enough, if they don't know how to deal with trauma, say, let me get a hold of somebody I know.
That's right.
Right.
Who could come and walk alongside of you. Because that's right. Exactly what Jesus did. He didn't say, oh, well, woman at the well, I don't want water from you because such and such. No, he told her what she had done in her life, and she accepted the Lord because of him coming, walking alongside with her, and she went and evangelized in the town.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to do. Be like Jesus. Don't turn people away. If you don't know something, find somebody you can.
Yeah.
And that's going to be one of my messages with people. And when I start speaking, if you don't know, find somebody who can.
Yeah.
And even if it's a licensed counselor, it doesn't mean you're learning something secular. I was sent to licensed counselors, and I was in Bible school. And if I hadn't gone, I probably wouldn't be here today.
That's
Just
right.
saying.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Because you're dealing with so much stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got to learn how to sort it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. The women we had an online conference. It was all women speaking. And one of the things that all of them said almost was this. They said to men, and I would say this strongly to men as a former pastor. Men tend to read books on leadership and theology, etc., and about other pastors and things like that. What they strongly recommended, these women, they said, read the stories of women. Listen to podcasts like this where women are telling their story, realizing most of their voices have been silenced for a long time, but hear their survivors' stories, hear what they went through, try to understand better what they're going through now. Because, that most, pastors tend to be narcissists and there's going to be fallout like this. So listen to the stories of women. And I think your story has been framed really well today.
Oh,
flowed, and we interrupted you several times, but
that's
hopefully that was just clarifying, not.
Well, the other thing I see is that people tend to put leadership and pastors as on a pedestal.
Exactly.
And we don't need to give ourselves that much to leadership and pastors. We can be us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And be who we are. But if we don't agree, yes, we can question. And some pastors don't want to be questioned.
Yeah.
I would say most pastors.
Most of them, yeah.
I would say most pastors don't want to be questioned.
And it's really hard because, women have been given a bad rap over years anyway, for centuries.
Yeah.
Like we don't know anything, but there are some women who do, and God's working on them, and he will work on them the same way he works on men.
Yeah. And we try to encourage people to develop their own intuition. I heard that in your story.
I heard that in your story a lot.
You didn't use that word, but I had a feeling. I knew it. And
yes,
I would encourage everyone to work on that. Anyway, so we're already out of time, but we have a couple more questions.
Well, I wanted to ask you, and you may have already shared this, but we ask people that come on our podcast, if you had a billboard that could say anything you wanted it to say, length is not an issue, can be short, can be long, whatever. What would be your message to the world?
Gee, that one's a hard one.
Yeah, we didn't prepare you.
I would say you can heal from past trauma.
Absolutely.
There's a
There
lot.
is healing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
There is.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. Well, Karen, is there a way that people can get in touch with you if they want to know, either maybe they're resonating a lot with your story and they just need somebody to talk to, that person like you shared with us earlier? Is there, I mean, are you comfortable with people contacting you?
Yes, that would be fine. I have a Facebook account. I have an email too, but if they will contact me on Facebook, then I will go ahead and give them further information.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And I'd be more than happy to talk to someone, because it's a rough road out there.
Yeah, it is.
And they make it rough for you. Narcissists make it rough for you, I think.
Sure.
Pastors do, and people who don't know.
Yeah.
Or they give those pat answers. And even if a pastor just learns to listen and not say anything, it's like you get that off your chest.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that pastor can be, helped by giving them ways to reach out to people, what to look for, what to do.
Right.
So that they can help these people who they may not know how to help.
Exactly. Well, and if nothing else, something that Carl and I have talked about quite a bit on the podcast is that if nothing else, if we could just help churches to understand,
yes,
they need to be more trauma informed. I mean, they just really, they have so many people in their congregation that have been through traumatizing experiences, or perhaps even some spiritual traumatization, as we've shared here. And you cannot just ignore that. If we want true healing, you can just look out into our world right now, in our, like Carl mentioned, in our churches and in our world, there's a lot of traumatized people out there. We are fighting. We are so disjointed from one another. It's time to start really understanding the whole idea of being trauma informed
and educating leadership, like you said, having seminars or something to help them, some kind of guideline that they can fall back on, and maybe somebody whom they can contact within their community. Mm-hmm. I'd say if you're going to go and speak, find out what's available in that city, so that they can contact somebody, or even contact you, where you can give them contacts, at least if you can't do it,
Exactly. Well, Karen, thank you so much for joining us today on the Desert Sanctuary podcast. I feel like you have just not only brought a wealth of information to everybody, but I know that this conversation has been healing to me in many regards as well. So I'm hoping that our listeners have experienced that as well as they listen to this. So thank you so much for being on the Desert Sanctuary podcast. And as always, and Carl is stepped away for the second. So as always, I will say what he says: be where you are, be who you are, and be at peace. Thank you for joining us today on the Desert Sanctuary podcast.
Remember, all who wander in the desert are not lost.
We believe all of our stories are sacred.
We are always here if you need someone to hear your story.
Check out our blog on Pathos and also our YouTube channel.
And stay tuned for our Leaning Forward conference.
Remember, we love you.
And be at peace.